Greetings, brothers. I did say it was only a matter of time before 30 Sanguinary Guard won a GT. Well, the guy didn't win one, but he did go 5-0. So let's jump into it and see what we can learn from a return of always be charging with actually more Sanguinary Guard than there are in the lore. So thanks for stopping by. We're going to jump right into the list, but if you are new here, then I am John, the Blood Angels Commander, and this week we've just passed 10,000 subscribers on the channel. Thank you to each and every one of you for helping me out like that. It's so appreciated. Now, let's get straight into today's army list. So the list comes at the Baltic Cup Kiel 8. And I'm definitely not going to say this guy's name right, so I'm not going to try and pronounce it, because I can't even pronounce English names. But it's Manuel, and he gets second place with 5-0. So as always in these lists, we'll have a little look at BCP. We'll talk about his detachments, his strategies. We'll talk about some strengths and weaknesses I think the list has. And then we'll give it some overall scoring. And as you're probably aware, most tournaments are being pretty heavily dominated by Tyranids. Here in this tournament, 5 of the top 7 are Tyranids. We have one Harlequin player breaking in there, and then our Blood Angels player doing very well to split them up. I think it's a bit of an unorthodox list in some ways. It's a list we haven't seen really since the 8th edition. Let's check out the list. We start with our Sanguinary Priest. He is the Selfless Healer. He also has the Chief Apothecary, and he has Icon of the Angel. That basically means that we are going to be able to revive one model, reroll charges for everything around him, feel no pain around him, and also heal 2 units as well, which could be pretty handy. I should have said that this is a Vanguard and Patrol detachment as well, which I haven't been running for a while. I felt like battalions were the way to go in the second half of 9th, but this is what it is. We also have the Sanguinary Ancient, who is running Rites of War to grant Obsec, and Wrath of Baal to give that ever so critical 2-inch move to Blood Angels jump units. I think if you are going to run, I guess in this list, literally 40 jump units, then I think the Sanguinary Ancient is very key. I would say anytime you run over 20 jump units, you could consider the Sanguinary Ancient. In this list, we've got 40. And it's very simple. We get 2 squads of Sanguinary Guard, all with just bolters and axes, 10 man each. And we've got another squad of Sanguinary Guard, bolters and swords this time, and another 10 man. Now, I like to mix swords and axes, and I think that's even more so probably important now in Armor of Contempt, because axes are literally only going to be minus 1 AP into enemies that benefit from Armor of Contempt until we get to turn 3 and we get this Assault Doctrine. Personally, if it was me, I feel like I would be mixing 50-50. I also find it can be quite hard when you're deploying on the board to know, like, hey, the squad of axes are going to be best against this one unit. So, like, it's kind of sometimes in the thick of it, it's not so easy to get your units to precisely where they need to be. I think mixing makes that a bit easier, but I guess if you specialize like Manuel did here, you can actually still do very well. We then have a very cheap squad of Vanguard veterans. Everybody's rocking a Lightning Claw and a Chainsword. So we're keeping basically the bonus from having 2 melee weapons. Sergeant obviously has dropped his Lightning Claw for a Thunderhammer. Definitely be combat squadded if needed as well. But real sort of like infantry / horde mincer unit. Like, you're just going to get a lot of attacks out of those Vanguard veterans. It is just 1 damage, but maybe that's precisely what this squad is designed to do. Deal with the weaker threats, split up into 5-man combat squads if needed, and then the Sanguinary Guard will deal with the stronger threats. We also have a Landspeeder Storm in here that gives us a great way to potentially score behind enemy lines or get some sort of engage on all fronts play going. The Landspeeder Storm, I don't run one, but we've seen more and more Blood Angels players taking them and doing really well in tournaments with them. We saw, I think it was Sam Propokio a few weeks ago, run one, and he essentially won a tournament with a couple of Landspeeder Storms and I think some Eliminators. Now, the second attachment is the Patrol detachment. We've got a Chaplain on our bike, and he's geared up to be very survivable, with Soul Warden giving him an aura of Feel No Pain Against Mortals, Mantra of Strength to give him that 3 damage weapon, Canticle of Hate to give the +2 to charges, Armor Indomitus to make him survivable, And then he's also got Adamantium Mantle on there as well. So he's a real tank, in at 150 points. And then we also have, for another 150 points, the Sanguinary. And the Sanguinary here is the Warlord, which essentially means that he's going to be running Heroic Bearing is his Warlord trait. And normally I don't really rate Heroic Bearing, right? Because like it gives rerolls, which the Sanguinary doesn't actually grant any rerolls, but it does give +1 to morale. And big 10-man squads of Sanguinary Guard, they don't have the best morale in the world. They don't have a sergeant in the Sanguinary Guard squads, so you are just looking at a morale of 8. So getting this extra point of leadership could actually be pretty useful here. Now, probably one of the most important plays in this list is going to be the Sanguinary starting the game in strategic reserve, so that he can arrive via the Miraculous Savior rule, and then basically it counts as like he can join any Blood Angels fight in the opponent's charge phase, and you can basically place him within engagement range, and he's counted as heroically intervening. Now, the cool thing about this, I guess, and there's a couple of cool things about this, is if the combat then goes on a couple of turns, he grants the +1 you would normally get to Shock Assault, even if you haven't been charged or are charged. So he essentially gives those Sanguinary Guard more power to keep getting additional attacks if any combat lasts a few more turns. Another thing that you're going to use here for 1 CP, and you're going to use this on both on the Chaplain and the Bike we just talked about, and the Sanguinary, and this list only starts with 4 CP, so CP usage around Angel Sacrifice is going to be huge. He's going to potentially sacrifice the Chaplain on the Bike and the Sanguinary, and I think the Chaplain on the Bike for the most part will be able to tank through a single turn with Armor Indomitus and that Feel No Pain, and the fact that he's got like 8 wounds. So the Sanguinary maybe will be able to tank now. You'll need to get a little bit of luck. He's got a tiny bit better with Armor and Content, but it's not huge. But he is always -1 to hit the Sanguinary. So you have 2 characters there that you can potentially join a melee. The Sanguinary join any melee anywhere on the board, basically. The Chaplain you have to be a bit smarter with. And then you're going to Angel Sacrifice. So that basically you're going to try and use these characters to mean that the Sanguinary Guard, assuming that they make it into combat, bearing in mind they're going to get +2 to all their charges, they're going to reroll all the charges, they're going to get +2 to movement. The whole army is designed to just get those Sanguinary Guard to be super mobile and reliable, and then potentially sacrifice your characters to save them. And at 150 points, it is a lot of points, but if it keeps an entire squad of Sanguinary Guard immune to some big nasty character like Mortarion, it could be worth every single one of those 150 points. And like I said, Heroic Bearing normally isn't my favourite choice as a Warlord trait, but leadership here might have some value. We then finish up the second attachment with a squad of Intercessors with the auto bolt rifles, which is fine, I guess. I mean, I'm preferring Cursors so much to Intercessors. I just think that the ability for guerrilla tactics is huge, especially if you are trying to move around the board and score points. Then we have a couple of squads of Servitors. I can really just see these as objective holders. They obviously are a lot worse at Nakman Data now. Maybe they could raise a banner. Maybe they could plant a bomb in the mission where you plant primed explosives or something like that. But for the most part, these guys are just sitting in your backfield. Your backfield in this list is not going to be that strong, right? You got the 1 squad of Intercessors. You get the 2 squads of Servitors. Everything else is going to be thrown forward as fast as possible, it feels like. And with 40 jump units, I guess you're going to try and really put the fear into your opponent. 4 CP, I think, is one thing to note here. And it's also 4 characters, so it's actually a little bit vulnerable to assassinate. Bear in mind, you're probably going to want your characters to be around to sacrifice themselves. So that, too, may make it a little bit vulnerable. But it did go 5-0, so worth noting. I actually didn't think 30 Sanguinary Guard was going to be that strong. I kind of think if you make 3 of the same unit and you just spend all your points on them, it kind of makes your list one-dimensional. It's like you're good at one thing. And Sanguinary Guard are weak into certain enemies, you know, like into Death Guard, into Custodes. I feel like there's another big one, potentially into Eldar as well now. So, Always Be Charging is back on the menu with 40 jump troops. My question about that really is, you remember in Lord of the Rings when the orc was like, "Meat's back on the menu, boys." Since when did Uruk-hai get menus? Like, where's he been going that's got a menu? Maybe the Shire, I guess. Anyway, I digress. We have 3 times 10 Sanguinary Guard. We kept them as cheap as we could. Like, there's no Infernal Pistols. It's just bolters and swords or axes. 960 points for 30 of them. I mean, I guess we've got to keep them as cheap as we could. But, I mean, Sanguinary Guard are fine with their bolters and swords and axes. For the most part, that's how I run them. Yeah, 30 of them. That's going to put a lot of hurt on the opponent. We also got the Ancient to basically grant the 2 additional inches of movement. They're going to basically be able to give one of the squads +1 to hit, and they're also going to give us that all-important obsec, which is going to be... There's going to be plays around there for sure when you just jump on an objective with like a Sanguinary Ancient and 10 obsec Sanguinary Guard. If you back them up with the Healer, which is the very next thing in the list, you've got that double heal, you've got the revive, you've got charge rerolls. I guess you're trying to give your Sanguinary Guard a bit more staying power, and you're probably going to be able to get a lot of healing off in this list. Normally I don't like the Healer because I feel like it's quite hard to maybe heal 5 people or 5 models a game and feel like you got value out of them. I mean, with this many jump units, it's going to be difficult for the opponents to kill the entire unit. 10-man Sanguinary Guard on a 2-up save, ignoring AP1. Second, you get them in cover. I guess that's a 1-up save, ignoring AP1. I mean, and then you've got the Feel No Pain around the Priest. I feel like you're definitely going to be able to do revives in this list. So that's probably going to be quite a key part of winning games and keeping the pressure on your opponents. We got those 10 Vanguard Vets who are going to be able to combat squad. They got a ton of 1 damage attacks, and they're very cheap, using just chainswords and lightning claws for the most part. We get 1 Thunderhammer in there as well. The Storm, like I said, could be very good for scoring options. Behind enemy lines is going to be one that definitely feels like it could be scored. Another one that could be scored, I guess, is the Blood Angel specific Relentless Assault, with behind enemy lines maybe being a little bit more reliable, but typically maybe a few less points gained from it. We get the super tanky Chaplain on the bike, and he's also providing an aura of 5+++ against mortals. So with the Priest and the Chaplain, you could pretty much have all 40 jump units with some careful positioning in some sort of Feel No Pain. One has Feel No Pain bubble, the other one with a big bubble against mortals, and then the Sanguinary to just jump in on any sort of counter charge and potentially save a lot of Sanguinary Guard. Then they get healed up, then they get the additional attacks from the Sanguinary being in the combat, and hopefully be able to just fight back pretty effectively. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of this list? Well, I mean, there's a ton of melee threat, and every character is designed to augment them as much as possible. And this is something that I've been running in my lists, trying to make sure that all your characters are just much more buffing characters as opposed to combat characters. I think this edition, buffing characters is probably the better way to go. I'm just not sure I like 4 characters. It's a big investment, especially when you think of like Sanguinary 150, Chaplain on the bike 150, the Priest at 155, and then the Ancient at 110. You're basically like 565 points. It could be slightly different. I can't do that math in my head that quick. 565 points on characters, 960 points on Sanguinary Guard. There's not really many points left for anything else, is there? But, I mean, I guess the whole point is to just get the absolute maximum out of those Sanguinary Guard. Obviously, the Sanguinary Guard having the ability to be obsec is going to be very, very strong, provided as well that you can do a lot of heroic intervention plays on the Sanguinary Guard. And one thing that's great about the Sanguinary Guard is sometimes it makes more sense to sit in cover just off an objective, waiting for your opponent to move on to the objective. So basically in their turn they can't shoot you because you're in cover, you're obscured. When they move on to the objective, because they need to get onto the objective for stuff like Stranglehold, for obviously their primaries in the next turn, then you have potential of heroic intervention 6 inches with any of those big squads of Sanguinary Guard. You can also heroic intervene with the Sanguinary Ancient. That's something that I just learned this week. He does have the Sanguinary Guard keyword, so you do have the ability to give him that 6-inch heroic intervention. If he's carrying that obsec banner, could be very good if he just jumps onto an objective obsec and could score you 4 more points in your next turn. And we then have the revivals and the auras of mortal wound protection. So it's really all your eggs in one basket. Is it always be charging? I think it probably is. You just want to go forward as fast as you can, as hard as you can, and in some ways, I'm not going to say leave strategy at the door, but if your opponent is up against this list, they pretty much know what's coming, right? So has this list got some weaknesses? And of course it does. Every list has weaknesses. There's no forward deployment. Even if you just had that one unit of incursors there, some forward deployment might be nice. And also, you don't really have that many options for doing actions, right? I mean, you could do actions with a 10-man squad of Sanguinary Guard, but it feels like a giant waste. Unless you're maybe keeping one of the squads sort of hidden or protected for a few turns so that you can wait till the game's whittled out a bit, because sometimes when the game's leaning towards the end of the game and things are like strung out, that's when a decent sized squad of Sanguinary Guard could come in and do a lot of damage. There's no way preventing Overwatch. It's going to have to be very smart positionings, i.e. charging from obscuring positions, stuff like that. I mean, that's easier to do when you've got rerolls, 8-inch charges, or it's not even 8-inch charges, is it? It's 7-inch charges because you've got the +2 from the chaplain, and also the rerolls of the Icon of the Angel. So although we don't have a real lack of CP here, we do have like a lot of the key tools that we might want to be able to be effective. There's no fight last, which is fine. I guess it just depends. If you ever fail a charge and your Sanguinary Guard are left out in the open, they could be quite vulnerable. That's when the Sanguiner comes into play. And I really haven't run the Sanguiner myself. I felt like he's really expensive for 150 points. I guess that's what you have to decide, right? Because like, if you think of Mephiston at 140 points, he's granting like exploding sixes to your Sanguinary Guard. He's jumping around the board. He's doing a lot of killing. You compare that to the Sanguiner. It's complete opposite. It's like he's not jumping around. He's not doing a lot of killing. He's not giving potentially that much extra damage unless a combat drags on multiple turns. With 10 Sanguinary Guard, or even 20 depending on how you position on the board, our combat's going to drag on multiple turns? I'm unsure. So it's more about your characters are just there to try and make sure that these squads of Sanguinary Guard achieve their goals. And then I would say like 75% of the damage in this list is damage 2. So if you are running into something that has a ton of -1 damage, could it be Iron Hands? Could it be Death Guard? Could it be Custodes Dreadnoughts? Then you might actually have some real problems, because I found Sanguinary Guard wholly ineffective. Ineffective against stuff like Telemon Dreadnoughts. They just, the Telemons can turn off their rerolls. They have strength, toughness 8, so they're really difficult to wound. And then they also have their feel no pains and that sort of stuff as well. So some weaknesses, I think, for sure. I guess Custodes and Telemons aren't really something we're seeing in the meta right now. I thought Death Guard might see a little bit of resurgence with Armor of Contempt, but it hasn't seemed to be that way yet. Okay, thoughts on scoring. So OBSEC, we've just got that one troop choice, and it's a troop choice that I don't particularly like, and it's Intercessors. I think Incursors are infinitely better, but we do have Rights of War, so I think it's about 7.5 in the OBSEC. I would be tempted to go 8 here if you could overlap a couple of objectives with the Rights of War bubble, but I don't have that much experience playing Rights of War on the Sanguinary. I only just started doing that like last week, and I do actually really like it. So maybe 7.5 is a little harsh here. Maybe it should have been 8. And anti-or infantry / horde. Well, we get a ton of a jealous bolter fire. That's potentially 60 shots. So we have some other small arms fire. Those auto bolters, or like the bolters on the bike, and then the Vanguard veteran blender squad. So I guess if there was a screen that you needed to get through, then you would hope that 60 bolters could potentially blow up a bunch of screening units, and you could make your charges, and you could be all good. So probably like an 8 out of 10. Anti-vehicle monster, again, this could have been a 9.5, but I've said 9 because if we run into a lot of high toughness enemies where we're only potentially wounding on 4s or -1 damage enemies, Sanguinary Guards favouring the axes, now being a little weaker into Armour of Contempt, I prefer to run lists aiming to have like 15 3 damage or more weapons in my lists. That's something that I used to aim for 10, and as the meta has evolved to where it is now, I actually think 15 makes you actually feel a much healthier and stronger list. So that's why I've just gone 9 out of 10 rather than 9.5. Mobility, and we've gone for 9. It's a huge amount of mobility. There's a very few objective holders that aren't mobile, but assuming the right terrain, you should be able to put your opponent on the back foot probably from turn 1 here. Even though you've got no like pre-game Alpha Strike with like Incursors or Death Company, the 14-inch move with the 7-inch charge and rerolls, I mean, potentially in a game where the deployment zones are 24 inches apart, then you should theoretically have a pretty high chance of being able to make turn 1 charges. Or you definitely have the ability to advance into cover somewhere middle of the board and make a bunch, potentially 2 or 3 turn 2 charges. And you got the Priest there, so you can get the Assault Doctrine up in turn 2 as well, which is definitely going to be very useful. So specialization, I've done 8 out of 10. I've said like going full Sanguinary Guard, almost to the negligence of all else, especially when you talk about the characters in the Sanguinary Guard essentially being over 1500 of your points. There's no Overwatch Denial, which I kind of love against certain armies such as Tau. There's no Fight Last, which again I kind of love and do certain things such as Catan or anything that you have to do wounds to through multiple phases. Gaskell, Tharaka. It does seem a little bit risky, but smashing the... But I guess what this list is going to do is just going to smash the enemy with overwhelming attacks and speed. So I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Please leave me a comment down below on what you think of the list. Do you think it's strong? Is it something you would run? And if you would do something different, let me know why. I don't know if you guys picked up the Knights Codex, but you are able to now include an Imperial Knight with a Blood Angels detachment using the Agents of the Imperium keyword, so you do not essentially lose any of our doctrines or super doctrines. I'm going to be diving into that this Thursday night coming over in the Three Grots podcast, and I'm sure there'll be a video about that as well. So if you want to see more content based around getting the most out of your Blood Angels on the tabletop, I'd love it if you consider subscribing. In the meantime, thank you everyone that has already done so. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Please smash that like button if you did, and I will catch you in the next one. By the blood are we made strong, brothers. Peace.